we have somebody who's going to come up and introduce our speaker, Scott A.
Catch my breath. My name is Scott, and I'm an addict. Hi, everybody. It is an honor beyond measure to be allowed to introduce the woman who is going to speak to us this morning. I think it is only fitting that some of the readings came from the first edition, because when Pat and I got clean, that's what we read. But that was before there was a book, you know, and we had the little white book and some pamphlets. And if I'm not mistaken, I think I met Pat at an international conference of young people in Alcoholics Anonymous in Indianapolis, Indiana, Memorial Day weekend, 1974, I think. Then I moved to Atlanta. I had gotten clean up in Upper East Tennessee, and I came to Atlanta in 1980, and NA was thriving down here. As far as I was concerned, we had meetings all over the place, and Pat was very important in that. She is the person who lit the candle that became Narcotics Anonymous in Georgia. And she and I worked together briefly at Peachford once upon a time. I have admired and respected and loved this lady for almost 40 years. And I'm not going to say another thing except here is Pat from California.
Well, good morning. I'm Patty, and I am an addict. Alias Pat. It has first been a really honor, exciting privilege to be back in my home, my southern roots of Georgia, because this is where I grew up. I'm a transplant, so to California. But I have to say that when they asked me to do this, I was so excited. It was like 4 days before Christmas, and it really made my Christmas present. And it's such a wonderful time to have a reunion of all the people. We will never assemble like this again. This won't happen again. And what my thoughts are is that once we become together, it's like we never left one another. And that's how I felt. And I want to thank the privilege and of everyone here welcoming me back home, and the committee. Thank God for social media. That's how I was. That's how I was asked. And I sent a CD, and I didn't know how old it was. And you never listen to yourself. And I was listening to myself, and I go, boy, I go on and on and on. You know, got a lot to share, I guess, from all the years that I've been here. So I just kind of turned it over to God. And a couple of months later, Tony has asked me. I've never been asked to do something like this, obviously. I really haven't. And I have a lot to talk about, but I'm glad I brought this book. And I don't know if this gal knows where this comes from, but yes, things were different back then. And this book was given to me by Jimmy Kay, who was our founder of Narcotics Anonymous. So it says, Hi Pat, Great Convention, New York, 1983. And that's the last time that I saw him. He died shortly thereafter, and he was a frail man, but I spent an hour and a half talking with him about the beginnings. And I told him that when we started Narcotics Anonymous, we couldn't get a hold of the World Service Office. He says that's because it was only me. And it was out of his home. So I have speak to you, and I have to say that my problem is me. It's not so much my addiction, it's me. I had a lot of problems before I drank, before I used drugs, and I got here very young in recovery, but I'll share with you in a general way what used to happen for me when in growing up. I come from an only child. I come from an upper middle class home. I grew up in Buckhead. I didn't like myself. I didn't like who I felt inside myself. I didn't like other people, and I felt very transparent. And growing up in a home of alcoholism, my father was alcoholic all my life. My mother was a teetotaler and a very Southern belle, and like drinking mint juleps on the veranda. She was very much that type of a lady. And most of my using, and my using was rebellious. I was a very rebellious child. I had my first pot when I was 11, my first drink when I was 11, my first LSD trip when I was 13, and I skipped school a lot. I thought I would never graduate from high school. It was important enough for me to party and to enjoy, I thought, the instant gratification of life rather than being a part of life and wanting to be involved in school, service, academia. I really could have cared less. I felt inside most of my life before I came here that maybe one day I would find out what life was about. I didn't enjoy being with other kids that much. I was always tall, and back then when you're tall, you're made fun of. So I was made fun of all my life, and I didn't feel good enough, pretty enough. I didn't feel like that other people really liked me. So I was a very shy girl, and I lived in a fantasy, and I'm an only child. So I made up people in my head to be around. After I turned a certain age, around 15, I thought I had it pretty much together. And I had my first needle shot of cocaine at 15. And I was hung around people that were older than me. So my girlfriend introduced me to some people across the street from Grady High School, and this guy was fronting dope, and he says, if I put this in your arm, I will never support your habit. I said, you don't need to support my habit. I'm not going to ever have a habit. It's not going to ever be a problem for me. And it became a really big problem for me. So I used to take black beauties to school. I used to smoke pot on the stands before games. I used to skip school, drink beer. Everything was revolved around a substance, not around studying a book. I graduated from high school and wasn't a very good grade, but I graduated. My father drank quite a lot, and we had that Shoney's on Piedmont. I'll never forget that. Yeah. And he'd come pick me up at school in his big old Cadillac, and he says, I got to stop off at Shoney's for just a little bit. You don't tell your mother. Pull that hot vodka out from under the seat, poured it, and I said, give me a little and I won't. And he did. Don't tell your mother. So my using was very short-lived. I mean, I started at 11, and I quit at 19 and a half. But in between all that time, it's not how much I used, it's what it did to me. It's how it made me feel. And for me that was shy, and when I used and when I drank, I could be anybody I wanted to be. At 16, I used to go to a nightclub, and at that time you could get a note from your mother and say you're going to a nightclub. And I'm in Cheshire Bridge. And I did, and I was dating, I thought it was real cool. I was dating a guy that was drumming in the band, you know, obviously I thought he was great. And the band was called the Soldiers, I think. I used to go to the Southeastern Music Hall, and we just had a thrilling time. The Allman Brothers always played at Piedmont Park, and I used to go down there and hear the Allman Brothers. And so I did all this about 16 years old, and I was thinking, well, now I'm really feeling good about myself, and when I get out of school, I'm going to really enjoy life, and I'm going to travel. And everybody was going to college. I had no college choice to pick. And my mother, when I was 14, I'll share this with you. When I was 14 years old, she found a Miss Tall Atlanta, and she thought she would enter me in Miss Tall Atlanta, and I used to play a violin, so she entered me in this pageantry. And actually, I became second runner-up in that pageantry, but I still never felt like it was going to make me feel good about who I was. I chose a college. I went there for a short time. I went to Botter Fashion College and Career for Women, and I modeled for Rich's department store. And I was going to get my degree in interior design and fashion and all that. And I left. I went down to 10th Street with a friend that I went to high school with. She dropped out of high school. I went ahead and dropped out of college, and I went down to 10th Street, lived down there for a while, and ended up in Chattanooga, Tennessee with some friends, and hitchhiked up there, I think. And so this guy was talking about going to California, and I said, great. He said, you want to go? I said, yeah, let's go. So we stole a Corvette, and he was dodging the draft from Vietnam, and so I went out to California. When I got out to California, I had no clue that my life was going to take a total turn for the worse, and it was not good anyway, but it got worse. And I ended up living on the streets in California of Laguna Beach. I had no place really to go. So I ended up living in this hotel, this sleazy old hotel, and I said if my mom knows I was here, she would kick my butt because she wondered where I was, and my parents did. I just ran away. Decided to just leave. Didn't even tell them. And here I'm hitching hike with a suitcase and high heels. Yeah. And the heel came off of my shoe, and so I ended up with flat high heels. I didn't have we wore bell bottoms. I was skinny. I weighed about 126 pounds, My hair was down to my butt. I looked like crap. But I could not see that because I never looked at myself in the mirror because I didn't like who I was anyway. I had a lot of self-hate about me. By the time I ended up in California, and I was with this fellow, I can't remember his name, and he left, and I stayed there, and this is where it got really bad for me. I started getting into a lot of reds, a lot of LA turnarounds, a lot of Seconal, Tuinol, electropain, window acid, purple microdot, you name it, I was in it. And that's where it got even worse than that. I had my first shot of heroin, and I was off and running. Heroin made me feel like I was in control. It made me feel like I was involved in doing something that was going to take me somewhere, and it did. It took me places that I did not want to go. I couldn't get enough of it. So I'd use a half a load a day. I had tracks up and down my arm. I ended up running with some Chicanos out of Costa Mesa and Gardenia. I got myself in a lot of trouble. And being young, at 17 years old, I was in places that I thought I was going to get killed. I finally got arrested one time. I got arrested for possession of marijuana. The second time I got arrested for possession of marijuana. The third time I got arrested for prostitution. And the fourth time I got arrested for selling drugs to an undercover agent from Camp Pendleton. And I had 4 cop cars surrounding me. I had no armory on me. I was loaded. And they sent me to Laguna Niguel holding cell. Then they took me and sent me to the Orange County Hilton. That's what it's called, Santa Ana Jail. And I'd been there already 3 other times. And when I got there, the same girl that I was in there the first time was still there. She says, "You back again?" I said, "Yes, I'm back again." So I was in preliminary, and I made a phone call to my dad, and I told him that I was in jail. He says, "Well, that's tough." He says, "You could just rot in jail. I'm not going to come get you out. I will never come get you out." I said, "Why?" He says, "You've hurt me, you've hurt your mom. Your mom used to send you Billy Graham articles. Did you ever read those?" I said, "No, I never read Billy Graham articles." And he said, they would probably help you if you just find something yourself, or come home and you can, when you get out, you can come home and join me in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I joined AA, and I said, "That's the problem. I'm screwed." Because I had been around the Alcoholics Anonymous for years growing up as a child. My dad went to Alateen, I went to Alateen, he didn't go to Alateen. I went to Alateen, and he went to meetings in 1960, 61, 62, 63. In 1949, my uncle started the Preston Club of the Other Fellowship, and so we were always surrounded around alcoholism. My dad didn't do drugs. My mother surely didn't do drugs. And my daddy did not understand drugs. He didn't understand drug addicts. He was basically an alcoholic. And he didn't understand why I get myself in so much trouble. One time I asked him to bail me out of jail and bail my friends out of jail. This is one time in Fulton County a long time ago. And I said, "Would you do that for me?" And he said, "Only once." So he bailed 10 friends out and me. It didn't cost a lot of money back then to do it, less than $100. Seriously. And I went back and did the same thing over and over and over again. So being in that jail in Santa Ana was really a tougher place. And I thought, well, I guess if I have to stay here, I'm going to have to stay here. I have no choice. I can't get out. So eventually, you send me money for commissary and those kind of things. So I went to my arraignment, and that didn't seem to help because they weren't ready to let me out. Then my dad said, I made another phone call. I can only make a phone call once every month. I made a phone call and I said, "How about now? Are you willing to help me?" He says, "Well, I thought about it, and I was a little tough on you, and it just breaks my heart that you're there. And you've had one crisis after another, and I keep praying. So I will get you an attorney." He said, "Do you know one?" I said, "Well, I could probably find one from some inmates in jail. I'm sure they know a lot of attorneys." So I did. So I found this man, Bill Gamble, and I called my dad, and I said, "I got the phone number. You can call him." So he did. So my mom and him came out to California, and they went to my other hearing, and the judge said, "Well, young lady, we have decided to drop your case, provided that you never come back to the state of California again." Well, I don't think he would. I think he's dead by now. So I just said, okay, and I went back home. This guy I was hanging out with, I told my mom, I said, "I have to go to jail and say goodbye to him." She said, "No, you don't." I said, "Yeah, I do, or I'm not going back to California." I was still very manipulative. All I knew how to do was manipulate. So I had no clothes really because I just didn't have any. You know, I don't know where they all went to. And so I went to the shopping center or wherever we went, boutique I think or something. And I asked if I could have some money to buy some clothes. So she says, you need to buy decent clothes. I said, I will. I'll buy some decent clothes. So I bought myself some suede hot pants and some fishnet stockings and boots. She said, you're not going out like that. I said, well, I'm not going back to Atlanta. So I went and said goodbye to this guy and said bye-bye. I went back to Atlanta. He followed me all the way to Atlanta, and I was off and running again. We're doing the same thing over and over again. I got a job. I was so excited. I never had a job in my life. So I got a job at the Lowe's Grand Theater. And the Ten Commandments must have played there for 3 years in a row. I believe it did. And I worked in a concession stand, and they had no cash drawers, so I stole a lot of money. I got caught, and the guy said, well, I won't turn you in if you do this for me. And I said, hell no. I'm not going to do that for you. No. I said no. And so he said, well, that's okay. I won't turn you in anyway. I said, fine. So I always had those kind of series of breaks. At the time after I had been on those streets, I wanted to get to my recovery. I couldn't handle it anymore. I had overdosed one time, and I had a red streak going up my arm. I had shot 2 in all in heroin together, and I had a red streak going up my arm. And the guy I was with said, Bob, I think his name was, he says, you know, your arm's going to get amputated if you don't go to the hospital. I said, no, it's not. He said, yes, it is. He said, you need to go. So we took the bus down to Grady Hospital, and I sat there for 3 hours waiting to see someone. And I saw this doctor, and he says, you're just a little junkie. He says, you need to go home. He says, I'll give you some salve and some hot compresses, and hopefully it'll heal. But you're going to die one day. That's what he told me. He says, you're not going to live. And so I went ahead and went back to using again. I just found another place to shoot some dope. Couldn't use that arm, use the other arm. When I was, back up a little bit, I was in California. I was with 3 guys, and we were riding up in the San Juan Capistrano Mountains, and they can be pretty curvy. And I had eaten a bunch of Reds and drank a bunch of beer, and this guy went 80 miles around a hairpin curve, hit on the other side of the rest area, hit a parked car, and we went 150 feet off the cliff. Yeah. And 2 of those guys died. I was rushed to Elsinore Hospital that was just being built, and wasn't very big. It was still in construction. It was raining, and they called my parents, and they thought I was dead. I had 19 stitches in my left ankle from that. And I forgot to mention that. That's why I backed up a little bit, because that was another scene that just said, oh, that's just a series of bad breaks. This won't ever happen again. And I'm lucky to be alive at that time. So I had that overdose. And then I went back. Within 2 weeks, I had another overdose. Within 2 months later of that, I had another overdose. The last overdose that I had, I was gone for 3 or 4 or 5 seconds. And I don't know why this is, but they shot me up with some milk and I returned to life. Don't ask me how. I think God always had a plan in my life, and He took care of me when I couldn't take care of myself, and I think He does that with all of us. It didn't take but about a month later, and it was in July. It was hot. I was downtown on 10th Street. I went to the Rexall drugstore. I put 10 cents in a phone, And I called my mom and I said, I don't want to do this anymore. I had on a nightgown because I don't know where my clothes went. I almost lost my clothes. Couldn't find them. So I said, I want to come home. And my mom says, if you come home, you're probably going to have to go to meetings. I said, what kind of meetings? Well, your dad's in Alcoholics Anonymous, and he's probably going to ask you to go to meetings. I said, but I'm not an alcoholic. She said, I don't know. You'll have to talk to your dad when you get home. I said, can you send me some money for a cab? And she said, sure. So she sent me money for a cab, paid for the cab when I got home. I hadn't been home in a long, long time. And I had a little tiny plastic suitcase of whatever I put in it, and I left. The guy I was with was in jail, getting ready to go to prison. I just said, I don't care, because I know being around him was the worst thing I could be around. And I didn't know about changing playmates and playgrounds back then, but I knew that if I hung around with him, I was going to be off and running one more time. So I went on to home, and my daddy says, we're going to a meeting tonight. And I said, why? I kept saying, why do I have to go? He says, you're going to stay here, you have to go. So there were some clothes I'd left behind. There was a few things in the room. And I had on this Sunday dress, because that's all I left all that stuff. I didn't take a Sunday dress with me when I was hitchhiking to California, And so I put on this Sunday dress, whatever it was. And I went to the meeting. I was just scared to death. I was sick. I had also been on methadone. And when I used methadone, all it did was give me a cheap high so I could continue using heroin, and the methadone was legal. And I had a methadone card from Fulton County. And so we went on to the meeting, and the Biscayne room. This is where I came in because Narcotics Anonymous was not around when I came in this fellowship. And there was a train track that ran right through that meeting room, and the meeting room was really, really small. I was probably the youngest member in that room. I was 19 and a half years old. I was 4 or 5 weeks shy of turning 20. I wasn't sure that I was going to stay. I think I did it as a stop for a while so that I had a place to stay that was safe. That's how I saw things. And there's the meeting, this guy was sharing at a podium like this that I thought he had to be 30 years my senior at least. And I had a hard time identifying with it. It was really tough for me. But when he talked about being a phony, a liar, cheat, and a thief, and I think those are the kind of words that he used, I could identify with that. But I didn't identify with his story because he almost lost his Rolex watch, and he almost lost different things in his life that he was high bottom, and I didn't identify with any of that. But after the meeting, people came up to me and said, we've heard so much about you. And I said, uh-oh, they know my secrets. And I didn't have any secrets because I felt very transparent. They said, we know a lot about you. And I said, well, okay. And they started giving me a hug and said, we love you. We're so glad you're here. And I said, I don't understand what you're talking about. How could you love me? I don't know. I don't love me. And though after the meeting, I did pick up a white chip they had then. I still have that chip, but now it's yellow. It's not white anymore. But it always remembers where I come from. I went out through the meeting. He took me over to this place called the Nava Club, and it was a real dark room, and it had dinner. You could eat dinner downstairs or whatever. And so I met Bobby Joe, Billy Joe, and this lady named Lillian. And Lillian was gorgeous. And I thought, she's so pretty. But I didn't hang around with women because I had nothing to do with women when I got here. All I thought when I grew up in high school and grammar school, that they were catty, they weren't nice to me, so I didn't want to be around women. But now my life is so much involved with women. But back then, no. And so they said to me, well, there's a lot of meetings that you can go to, and you need to go to a meeting every night. And I had a difficult time identifying. Finally, there were some young people that came in the program, like Bobby S. and some other people. I got a little guy named Philip. He was like 16 when he got here. And so it started evolving, and I started to get accustomed to younger people. So I got actively involved in young people. I got actively involved in the International Conference of Young People. And A lot of us who have been around a long time, when there wasn't NA, that's what we were involved in because we were young when we got here. And I got the same thing as Jimmy was talking about, you know, that I've spilt more than you drink. And I used to say, well, you should have gotten here sooner, you know. That's how I was thinking at the time. So we had they were putting on I got involved in service work, and they were putting on an international conference of young people, and they were taking the bid to San Francisco. So I went to San Francisco with my girlfriend Judy, and Judy now has 46 years. And I went out with her to San Francisco, and we got ourselves in some big trouble. And I stayed a little longer than I was supposed to. I had a job at Neiman Marcus. Yeah, I was their perfume girl. I used to walk around and get perfume and formals. And that job was very, very short-lived for me. I did not like it. It wasn't what I wanted to do, because I didn't know what I wanted to do, but it wasn't that. I just wanted to have fun, because I thought if you're not going to have fun in this program, why be here? That was my whole thinking. So we went to San Francisco, and the warm-up band was the Grateful Dead. And I remember that vividly. And we all got up on tables and danced. We had a great, great time back then. Well, the story I always share is that I met my first husband at that convention and my third one. And my first husband, a lot of you know, and that was in '73 that I met him. And he was with Big Ed, and I thought he was hip, slick, and cool. Well, he was that. He came to Atlanta in 1974 and stayed with a friend of ours named Marion. And I had gotten a job in '73 with someone I was dating at the time, whose mother was going to be a director of nursing at a hospital. They were going to open for addictive disease and psychiatric care. And they said, why don't you go over there and get an interview? My mom would love to see you and talk with you. I said, to do what? She says, you could be a counselor. I said, I know nothing about counseling. She says, well, you know, you're young, you're in recovery, you're enthusiastic, you're involved in service work, so go over there and give it a try. So I did. And I went over there, and they hired me instantly. Dr. Conway Hunter hired me. He was going to be the director, and so I started there at the hospital working. And wasn't a year later that Chuck came into my life. But at that time, I had got a job there, and I was excited. I didn't know what we were doing, but I went to work for $2.25 an hour as a counselor. Oh, big money. It was wonderful, because I felt like if I could give away something that somebody had freely given to me, that maybe that I would stay clean and enjoy life, you know, because I was excited. I was excited about being in recovery. To get to the story that is more fulfilling than ever has been in my whole life, after I was there almost a year, this little old fella down the hallway, he said, come here a minute. I said, what? And his name was Joe Hubbard. And he must have been, because I'm 6 feet, I think he came about to maybe 5'7", you know. And he looked up at me and he said, I need to talk to you. I've been thinking about something. I said, okay. He says, you know, he paused a lot when he talked. He says, you know, I believe that it's important that since you're a drug addict, that you want to maybe get these drug addicts out of Alcoholics Anonymous. I said, well, what are you talking about, Joe? He says, well, I've been reading. And he says, have you ever heard of Narcotics Anonymous? And I said, no. He says, I said, no, nothing about it. I said, isn't there a Neurotics Anonymous? He says, yeah, there is, but I'm not talking about that program. I'm talking about Narcotics Anonymous. I said, well, how do I find out? He says, I don't know. That's for you to find out, and you need to give me a report in a week. I said, why am I reporting to you? He says, because we've been talking around here in the staff, and we know that you're the it girl to help that get started, and we want to see that happen. because we got a lot of young people that are starting to come into the hospital, and they're not identifying with the alcoholic. I said, well, I understand that. You know, they're maybe not as lucky as you to have a parent that came in the program. So can you help us out? I said, sure. So I thought, well, so I went to Chuck, and I said, Chuck, this is what Joe said to me. And he says, okay. He says, well, let's try to investigate that. And he had lived in California, so California's a lot more liberal and had a lot of people and a lot more time in recovery. And he says, well, you know, I don't really know either. He says, but I tell you what, you ought to call Synanon. I said, I'm not calling Synanon. My daddy almost sent me there. And he says, no, call Synanon. I said, okay. I said, who do I talk to? He says, I don't know. We'll find out. So we got a phone number. You know, back then you had long-distance phone calls, and they're kind of expensive. So I made a phone call a certain day or weekends or sometime after the weekend hour, you could make a phone call. It's a little bit cheaper. So I got on the phone and I asked to speak to Charlie Dietrich there. And they said, sure. And I got on the phone with him and I said, told him who I was and what my recovery and a little bit about where I worked and how this is, you know, I was asked to help start this. He says, we do have Narcotics Anonymous. We don't have a lot of them. He says, but they don't have meetings that they're seen. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, they're underground. So Narcotics Anonymous was kind of underground in the area. And he explained to me why. He says, because if they had the meetings where people would just walk in a church and go to a meeting, you'd have the narcotic agents around you. Because they didn't believe that drug addicts could really stay clean. You know, they were dying, or they overdosed, or they were in prison, or they couldn't ever make it. There was always no hope when you looked at a dope fiend. They were stereotyped. So he says, I don't know, good luck. And he says, I hope to help you. He says, you may want to try to call this guy in Lake Whitney. He may be able to help you. So I said, okay. So this is where Mary, who spoke last night, and I were talking, and we ended up knowing the same person. And that was just kind of ironic that would happen. So I went ahead and wrote a letter because I had no phone call. I said, here's the address. So I wrote a letter and I sent it to him. He sent me back a 2.5, 3-page legal side yellow paper. And he says, you know, I've been involved in the International Young People's. And he says, but there are some NA meetings. We're starting off, and it seems to be doing really well. And there is a book that I can send you. And I said, great. I said, what is it? And he says, a little white book, and I'll send that to you, and maybe that'll help you. I said, great. So I got together with a couple of people. Bo came around, and then Chuck, and we started talking, and we made a flyer. It's handwritten. And I wrote this handwritten flyer, and we went to AA meetings, and I said, can I make an outside announcement? And they said, sure. So I made this outside announcement, and I said, we're having our first Narcotics Anonymous meeting. It'll be August the 24th, 1974, and it's going to be in the staff dining room at Peachford Hospital. And that was our first meeting. It was the most awesome experience to have, but we didn't have a lot of people coming out of the woodwork at the first. We had 10 of us, I think, 10 to 12, and people always ask me who was there. You know, my memory was pretty good. I can remember most of the people that came. We did have a fellow that came and he brought a gun to the meeting. That became a problem. And Peachford was not into surveilling people when they walked through the doors. So they had to, Bo says, you've got to come here just a minute. And he asked them to leave, and they took the gun out. We recruited some people at that meeting, Robert Kay. Then we had Neil. We had myself, Chuck, Billy B. I remember Billy B. I used to see him at meetings at the Biscayne room, and Maggie had him hostage half the time. And she was a good person, though. You know, she really strongly believed that people can make it, and that they had to be structured, though. You know, she was very structured, and he was not really allowed to talk about his pill addiction in meetings. But he said, this is the best place to come. I'm free now to be able to share what it really feels like that I used pills for so long. And he says, I feel so good about being here. And it was really awesome to hear that, because he had been before me. And Robert Kay came. So the meeting was just kind of cool. That we just didn't know what we were doing. You know, we had no clue. We used and sold Hazleton literature. We sold the day by day. We had no chips. We got a birthday book, and we wrote down how much money we collected and when people's birthdays were, and write down your clean date. Now, back then, we didn't say clean. That was a new word. We didn't say it. We still said sober. Sorry. We didn't say it because we didn't know. Well, you know, clean, sober, what difference does it make? We didn't even say recovery. We just said, okay, we're glad we're all sober today, because we had no clue. We had no chips. And later things started to happen. Cecil L. came around. We had no coffee pot. The hospital didn't have a coffee pot to give us, so we were going to be self-supporting through our own contributions. So we had enough money maybe to buy a big old coffee pot, and it wasn't a lot of money back then, and it was in a big box. And we got the coffee, we got the cups and all the stuff that goes with it. And Cecil had no place to live. He lived in a tent in front of his girlfriend's home. So he would hitchhike with the coffee pot to the meeting. Never thought that was the wrong thing to do. We just said, okay, nobody gave him a ride. He said, that's okay, I'll get there. He always showed up. We had a coffee pot. And we were going around getting other people maybe involved that wanted to be involved in Narcotics Anonymous from the other fellowship, and starting to come around. It started to be 10 people, and then it became 15 people, and we outgrew that staff dining room, and we were almost as big as this room in here in the cafeteria. And then we went to other places to have meetings. We started at DAC, Peachtree Parkwood. We had a meeting at this is where Bill W. came involved. We took a meeting to the VA hospital. And in the VA hospital, it was called the Navajo Group, which is Narcotics Anonymous Veterans Administration Helping Others. That was the title of it. And I took the meeting with Chuck there, and I think it was just he and I, maybe one other person. And there's where Bill W. learned about Narcotics Anonymous. And he'd been around in and out for a while, and he came up to me and he says, how do I join Narcotics Anonymous? I said, when you want to, you're a member. You know, when you say you are, you're a member. He says, well, I'm coming because of you. And so I said, okay, whatever. And so he came and he got out of VA and he started really hanging out, getting really, really involved with us. Then in 1975, I met Elliot, and he's gone past now, so I can share this. He was in the hospital that I worked, and he was on Valium addiction, really strung out on Valium, and he came up to me one day and he says, I got to do my 5th step. Would you listen to it? I said, no. I said, no. I said, no, I will not listen to your 5th step. He said, well, what? I said, you go over there and get your male counselor, someone else to do that. He said, I'd rather you listen. I said, no, Elliot, I'm not going to do it. So he was so funny. So we got the group started, and some of you who've been around, remember some of the meetings that we began to have, we started, there was the Rising Sun in Marietta, where Bo was starting the Rising Sun, and they had this survivors meeting, it was all night long, got to get it off your chest group, and they go to breakfast afterwards. I went to that a few times. They had many other other things to do, starting to have fun, and we got involved in service. We started our first area service committee meeting, and they elected me secretary. Oh, that was a mistake, because I wrote down everything everybody said. I didn't want to miss a word. Like he explained, she said, he said, and I typed it on an electric typewriter. And we went and had other things. We wanted to start to have fun. Bo had gone down to Florida and stayed at the Thunderbird motel in Panama City, or Fort Walton Beach. It was Fort Walton, I think. And said, we ought to get a group of people together and start having something fun. So we started saying, let's have fun in the sun. That's how it became about. So we had our first bus trip, and we needed somebody to coordinate the bus. So Chuck elected to have Elliot do the bus. That was a challenge. He says, well, what kind of bus do I get? And Chuck says, well, it would be nice if you got a big bus so we could at least have 40 to 50 people on that bus. He said, oh, okay. You know, he's thinking of a van, I think. I don't know what he was thinking. So he got a hold of some people, and we got the bus, and it only cost back then to go round trip on that bus $30. Now, that's a deal. So we all gathered at DAC in front of GMHI, and they let us use their area so we can kind of camp out when the bus arrived. And we went down to Fun in the Sun, and we started having an organization down there and having speakers and having meetings in rooms, and everybody got sunburnt, and it was a lot of fun. We had a great time. And Lynn W., if anybody remembers Lynn, he coordinated all the food. You know, we had all kinds of food to eat. And so if you didn't have money, it really didn't matter. You could still come back down there. People would sponsor you and help you out. It was a wonderful, wonderful time. So we had many of those. So that was one of our first experiences of learning to put something together for addicts to have fun doing. We had dances. We had an organization where we were trying to understand how we could pull together. In other words, how could alcoholics and drug addicts really have a sanction of a union that would still all identify with one another? So they had this program called ADAPT, Alcoholic and Drug Addicts Pulling Together. And we had dances. And that's where I met Tommy B. That was his first experience there. So we did, there was a lot of people there that stayed. We had dances, it was at a scout hut, we had a great experience, we kept having them, and then all of a sudden, the 70s were kind of starting to whirl, you know, and I got married to Chuck in 76, and I'll tell you what, my daddy did not want to walk me down that aisle marrying that man. But you see, I was young, I thought he was cool, and I wanted to be with cool people, so I got married to him. So around in that time, getting married, I moved away from Atlanta for a short period of time and moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. Then he took me to New Hampshire. Oh boy, yeah. I was done. And at 4.5 years that I was clean, I wanted to use. The first time I ever wanted to use. I was very unhappy. I didn't like 5 feet of snow. I wanted to be, back with my roots. And I called, my daddy said, I'll send you a plane ticket, you get your butt home. And I told Chuck, I'm leaving without you, if you don't want to come. I'm not going to stay here. So he drove his car, I drove my car. We had CBs back then. Remember CBs? I was the Delta Queen. And I drove 20 hours as fast as I could go back home. We had to live with my mom and dad for a while. After that, we got an apartment and up there in Gwinnett County, and for $260 a month, all utilities included. That was a pretty good deal. I took a short sabbatical from working from the hospital for a couple of months. And after I got married, I came back. They went ahead and gave me back my tenure, so it's like I never left. And I just said, I'm not leaving Atlanta. I don't want to leave Atlanta again, And but that marriage was very tumultuous. I had a really tough time in that marriage. I went down paths that I never would go. I was this responsible one in the marriage. I worked all the time. He would be gone for months at a time or weeks at a time, selling pots and pans, I believe, or knives or something. And, you know, I mean, he was a good man in some ways, but in other ways, it takes two to tango. I should have never been in that marriage, but I was. And he helped many newcomers. He helped so many new people in this fellowship. He was very good with newcomers. 1988, 88, in April, I was with a little sponsee, and I wondered where he was. He didn't come home. He stayed in his same clothes for 3 days. He said he was very depressed, and he wasn't talking to me. And there's been a few times that he brought home the money, that he said he was going to bring home the money, and the money wasn't there. So I went through this several times, and I knew that my values have changed very much in this program. I had a really good value system, and I knew that I was responsible, and I knew that I was carrying the weight, and I knew that I had to do something and live in my truth. Because this program is about living in your truth. It's about being authentic. And I have learned that over the years. And I was such a people pleaser, and I was so codependent before codependency was cool. And finally, he did leave in '88, and he took off with my car, $5,000, and I was left. And I did something I probably shouldn't have never done. He wanted his clothes, and I burned them. Probably should have never done that. And I, in fact, you know, when I saw him, I did make those amends to him. And I told him, I said, I apologize for doing that. But he never apologized to me. So, you know, I have to realize, and that's what made me realize over the years, that because we sometimes have a lot of time, doesn't mean we have the quality and the spiritual condition and the maintenance to be in a life and live on life's terms and be responsible. But I didn't understand that back then. I was very involved in service work. I was involved in a bid committee on Houston to bring the World Convention back to Atlanta in 1979. I was very grateful to him for showing me a path of service, because he was great at that. So he was a good man in so many ways. And after that time of 1988, I was still working in the hospital. I got promoted in 1983, and I was asked to write a program for outpatient services. And I had gone back to school and gotten a couple of credentials and enjoyed doing that. Got involved when we had certification board and so on, and for certified addiction counselors. And so I was involved in many things from the startup. And it was important for me to recognize the fact that I wanted to be good to my word. I wanted to be the person I always wanted to be. I also wanted to be a person that could be counted on, and I was very responsible. So I was good about doing things along those lines for a long time. I quit working at the hospital. I decided that after 27 years, it was time to move on. In 1988, this is where, you know, in between those marriages, I married someone else, and he gambled. I always had a great picker, I'll tell you. And he gambled, and that was a problem for me, because I couldn't stay in a marriage with someone gambling. So we stayed married for 10 years, and then we divorced. And then in the first other time was in '88. I'm jumping around a little bit, but in '88, I was able to be by myself, enjoy my life, and Timothy, who is the third husband here, he's my third husband, he and I got together in '88, and we did fall in love, and we would have probably been married back then. I bought a house, but it wasn't the right timing, because his children were 7 and 9, and his little boy said, I won't pack anything or help you because 3,000 miles is too far away and I only see you twice a year. And it broke his heart, and he said he couldn't do it anymore. So he went back to California. And during that time, I had so much grief. I'd lost my father in 83. I was speaking at a convention and in front of the sun, and John Clark and a few other people came down to me off the beach and said, you got to go home. I said, why? And they said, just heard your daddy just died. I said, no, he didn't die. And they said, he died. And that broke my heart. So when I came back to Atlanta and we buried him, I put my 10-year medallion in his coffin because he saved my life. And he was a man that I honored, I thought had great humility, and I missed him. And every time I talk about it, it chokes me up because I loved him. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him. Even though there was another fellowship in my life, it really didn't matter. He showed me a way to live. He was God's tool and instrument to show me that I didn't ever have to use again. And that there was hope for me, even as young as I was. So after that time, life became different for me. It was the first time after that time in 10 years, my 10th anniversary, that I felt like that there was something spiritual that I could connect to with God. Because I had a hard time connecting to God. It was difficult for me to know that God really existed, even though I could feel him at times, but I didn't have him really in my heart. And that was the beginning of showing me that this is my own God. I could have an experience that lived within me. So in 88, after Timothy and I were together for a short period of time, I had I would say an emotional meltdown. I got suicidal. And I don't know if any of you have ever had any length of time where you got so depressed that you didn't know if there was another way out. Even though I knew there was a way out, that my problem was not drugs anymore. My problem was me. And I had many defenses that I didn't deal with. I could look at me in the mirror and say, I'm okay, but that was deluded thinking. I could go to meetings and share with you my experience, strength, and hope with all of that at 15 and a half years, thinking I'm something, when I had nothing to give. I was very depressed. I had lost my daddy. My mother was very ill, getting very ill on the onset of Parkinson's disease. I was in a job that I had always loved and enjoyed, but I was getting tired. But I knew that people needed me. I worked 60 hours a week. My whole life was working and going to meetings when I could, doing fun things, but I worked mostly. I didn't have a life. I didn't know how to balance a life. What I did became who I was, rather than me just being who I am. I lost me. So I began to recognize the fact that I better do something about that. And there were a few people that were very concerned about me, who talked with me and said, you may need to take a break. I said, oh, I can't. They need me. I can't do that. I'm a director, don't you see? I have to be there. I have to direct people. They said, you can't even direct yourself. You're out of control emotionally. So Timothy was still there, and I was at Bill F's house, and I said, I need some help. I need to go somewhere. I'd already talked to Human Resources, and they said, if you would need to take some time off, we care about you. You've done a lot for us. We'll do what we can to help you. They said, we can send you to another charter hospital if you want to. I said, oh, no. No. I don't want to go to another charter hospital. I want to go somewhere else. So I decided that I found a program. I checked my insurance, and it was going to cost me a lot more than going to a charter because I got a discount there. And so I chose to go to CR Tucson. I was 15 and a half years clean, and I went to treatment. Treatment was not around when I came in the program. There was no treatment programs. There was the Georgian Clinic. And I went to the Georgian Clinic for a few months. And the other night, last Monday, when I arrived here, Christy and Tommy says, "Will you come and speak for this lady named Lois? She knows you. She was at the center when you first came in. She knows who you are." I said, she's known me 43 years ago? And they said, "Yeah, she knows you." So I went there Monday, and she goes, "You hadn't changed a bit." I said, "Thank you so much."